So I've got Bo's antlers up here on the table from year 2 and year 3. And I wanted to go through these antlers and kind of show you guys the differences in from one year to the next, and then point out a couple things that you may not know about deer and antler growth. And if you're a whitetail fanatic like me and an antler fanatic, you kind of might find this interesting to know. So what we're going to do is start with his 2-year-old set here on the right side. And one thing you'll notice right off the bat on this side here is he has this odd tine coming off the back of his head. And that is just due to an injury that he had when he was early in velvet. I was actually out there, and I get in a bad habit of feeding the deer through the fence, and they want to stick their head through the fence and to get whatever you're feeding them. And a lot of times what'll happen is he got his velvet nicked right here, and it bled just a little bit. And what that's going to do, especially when they're in velvet, is anytime they nick their velvet or cut themselves in velvet, they will grow a tine out of the spot where they had the injury, where it's healing up. So a lot of people contribute odd tine growth to injuries to the body. Say if their left side grew different from their right side, then they had an injury to a back leg or something like that. And I'm not really familiar with any of that. I never had that happen, so I don't know whether that's true or not. But me living with these deer every day and watching them grow every inch of antler that they put on their head every year, I'm able to know for certain exactly what goes on out there and what they're doing every day as far as their antler growth. And I can tell you for a fact that tine there was from an injury to his velvet. So I'd say a lot of the deer that you see, even in the wild, who have oddball tines, drop tines, and things like that, in a lot of cases, that's not a body injury, that's a velvet injury. So let's look here at the year 3 set. And you can see he's quite a bit bigger. He's got a lot more tine length, especially the G2 there. And the G3 actually really got a lot of mass on it. You can see it's really wide, and there's a lot of just points coming off of points. Still stay in that pretty typical frame. Still has the split brow tine, and it kind of grew backwards a little bit. You can see there where I glued it together. Now we just use some Gorilla Glue and glue the seams back together. Now you can tell it's been glued together, but that's a lot better looking than if he had wore these antlers all year and busted off a lot of these points. So that's why we like to do that, so to get a good representation of what they're doing every year. So we'll come and we'll look at his 2-year-old set for the other side. So he has quite a bit more points on this side than he did the other side. And same again, the G3 is really wide, got a lot of mass to it. He actually had a point coming off right here, and he actually broke that off in the velvet. I never did find that point. So that's his 2-year-old set. He didn't have any injuries on this side, so that's all genetic right there. And then this is the antler that you guys seen me actually pull off of his head. Now this year on this side, he really changed up quite a bit. He actually cleaned up a little. The G2 is quite a bit longer. The G3 The same, it's got quite a bit of mass on it. Not as many points coming off of it, but the beam length got quite a bit longer at year 3. And one thing that I do notice, and I don't know exactly the purpose of it, but when these deer shed their antlers, right along the edge, all the way around, they have this kind of a waxy ring. And I'm not really sure what the purpose of that is. And I can only assume that maybe it's how they end up cutting the blood flow off to their antlers. I'm not really sure, but they all have this kind of a waxy kind of a ring, and it dries out whenever the antler falls off. It dries out pretty quick and it falls off. So a lot of the sheds that you find laying in the woods and stuff, you won't ever see that wax ring. But when they're fresh like that, it's really noticeable and kind of a neat deal. So we talked about Speck a little bit too. Let me grab his antler that I cut off, and I'll show you an example of exactly what happens during these injuries that they have during the velvet. So this is the piebald buck that we call Speck, and this is the normal shape of his antler. This is what he grew as a 4-year-old. It is just a perfect, clean 7-point side. The same with the other side. He was a clean 7x7 that year. You can tell he's just about as typical, or is as typical as you can get on a deer. And then there's his antler from this year, where he had that injury in the velvet and where he actually hit the fence. And you can see the difference, just what happens when they do get an injury. Now, this was a pretty severe injury. Yeah, it was quite a bit more severe than what Bo had done, but you can tell it really affects how they grow their antler. Now, he still grew a 5-point side, a typical 5-point side, but you can see all of this down here that grew out the bottom and the back. And if you've seen this deer in the wild, all these drop tines and stuff, you would never have any indication that actually happened to him in velvet, that was an injury to the velvet itself. That's not genetic, and when he grows his antlers out this year, he's not going to have that oddball growth. He's going to go back to typical, hopefully, and won't look nothing like this. This is just the old velvet that he couldn't rub off due to this, being inside these bins and stuff. He just couldn't get that velvet off. But that is a perfect example of a deer who's injured in velvet, and it has nothing to do with genetics at all. So if you see a buck out in the wild, or if you actually shoot a buck out in the wild that's got some oddball stuff going on, then you might have a little bit better insight on exactly what happened to the deer, and that it's probably a velvet injury versus an injury to his body or something like that. So another example of an injury is this buck right here. Now, this is a buck that we raised. This was his 3-year-old set of antlers, and he had an injury that year. He actually had 2 injuries that year in the velvet. And this tine here is from an injury, and this big long drop, that is not genetic, that is from an injury too. So you know, you see that in the wild, you see a deer like that, and you think, you know, that's some type of a genetic thing, and they're going to pass those traits on to their offspring. But that's just, most of the times I would say that's not the case. That's actually from an injury, and on his 4-year-old set, he didn't have that. He was perfectly clean, typical, didn't have any drop tines or anything like that the next year. So there's a little bit of insight on some antler growth and what Bo's done and what Spec has done. And when it comes to injuries and stuff and odd tines, you kind of get an idea that a lot of times it's not actually genetics causing those abnormalities to their antlers. So thank you guys for watching the video today. I hope you got some insight on some antler growth, and we'll see you next time.